Hello and welcome everybody. Before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment and go over a few tips for using Zoom tonight. The first thing I want to let you know is that closed captions are available for this meeting, and you can access that by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom on the Zoom toolbar, and then you can change your subtitle settings there. The second is that you have been muted to accommodate the large amount of folks that are here tonight, but we really would like to hear from you. So we encourage you to use the chat box. You can get started by introducing yourself and letting us know where you're joining from and what you're hoping to get out of tonight's meeting. If you are joining by the phone and you have questions, you can email them in at danny@waterwatchers.ca and we'll make sure that they are addressed. The last thing I want to let you know is that tonight's meeting has been recorded, and that's so that we can send it out to you all after. So if you are looking to go back and listen to something else, it will be there for you. We really hope you enjoy tonight and learn a lot. I'm going to pass it on over to you, Mary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary, and I'm a resident of Blair. I'm super impressed with the interest and the turnout that we've seen for tonight. And I'm also very grateful for your time and attention to our Save Blair efforts. I believe that many of you are or have been involved in your own efforts to ensure a democratic process in your communities, or you've sent words of support or signed our petition or made a donation to the cause through a small change fund. And for that, I am also very grateful. I live in Blair beside an historic cemetery, which is one of the oldest in Ontario, actually. And the cemetery is poised right on a ridge that edges Carolinian Forest and overlooks the Grand River. And besides being home to some of Blair's first settler residents, it's also home to rare songbirds, ancient hedgerows, and you can often see bald eagles and osprey flying overhead. And those are some of the many reasons that I think Blair is such a wonderful place to live. Before we begin the community meeting, I'd like to acknowledge that the lands on which we live are also lands that have been traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. And we also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land today. So we're super excited to share more about Blair with you and why we're so keen to protect it from the undemocratic use of MZOs, which are ministerial zoning orders. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Balkwell. Mike and his team from Water Watchers have been incredibly supportive, and we are grateful for their knowledge and their experience. And Mike is a lifelong community organizer who has worked on grassroots issues for over 40 years. He has supported communities in their efforts to raise social assistance rates, protect groundwater from large industry, and improve children's health, among many other things. So we are so happy to have Mike and everyone else at Water Watchers on our team. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike now to walk us through tonight's agenda.
Thank you, Mary. We're going to see an agenda screen. So we're going to be having several speakers tonight who are going to present information to you. And after each speaker, we're going to have a question and answer period. And we're going to answer all your questions. And the way to pose a question is to put it in the chat box. And as you have your question, please put it in the chat box. You don't have to wait to the end of the presentation. And if your question is about something that's maybe different than the topic of the presenter, that's fine. Put it in the chat box, and we'll be sure over the course of the evening that we answer all your questions. If for any reason we miss a question, we are going to capture the chat box, and we are going to make a statement that provides a kind of a Q&A response. So with that in mind, the first speaker in a couple of minutes is going to be Alan Van Norman, and he's going to give an overview of the project and its potential impacts. This is going to be followed by Julie Hacking, who's going to talk about the presentation that the Broccolini developer made by the representative Chris Pidgeon, and also talk about some of the questions some of the benefits that council may think are offered by an Amazon warehouse project. Then Ed Voss is going to lead us through the behavior of council to date, what their record is, what they've done, what they've not done. As I said, after each speaker, there will be time for questions. We're very pleased that Mike Sullivan is with us tonight. He's part of the leadership group called Get Concerned Stratford that was successful in opposing an MZO that had actually already been given for a development proposal called the Jingyi glass plant. Mike's going to do a couple of things. He's going to compare the playbook of the developer to the experience we had in Jingyi. And when I say we, the Water Watchers supported Get Concerned Stratford in a successful campaign to stop the development and ultimately to rescind the MZO. So Mike's going to tell us about some similarities and give us some tips about what was important to their campaign being successful. That'll be followed by David Donnelly, who is the lawyer you've retained with Donnelly Law. David Donnelly was also involved in the successful campaign with all of us to stop the proposal in Stratford. And David's going to give us some of his advice as well. We're then going to come back to Mary McGrath, who's going to talk about action that your group has planned for the next while. And then we're going to do some fundraising. We're going to do some fundraising online because if you're familiar with the story of David and Goliath, the Goliath Broccolinis, I think, put $50 million on the table for this development already. And you're fighting your David or Davida. And we need to get some pebbles and a good slingshot. So we're going to do some fundraising at the end of the meeting as well. So that's the plan. And I always like to ask people when I'm in a meeting if we're at the same meeting. So I encourage you to say in the chat box whether this is a meeting that you signed up for, the things you were hoping to learn. And even as we get started, if you have questions that you hope are going to get answered tonight, please enter those in the chat box. Thank you all for being here. And now I'm going to invite Alan to the microphone.
My name's Alan Van Norman. I live in Blair. Been here for 26 years with my family. We live approximately 200 meters from the proposed new warehouse that will be built up the road from us. We live right beside Blair Creek. In fact, I can see the shift tower there out the east side of our house. We're very concerned about this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Blair, just a little bit about its history. I'm going to describe the surrounding landscape for you to get a better sense of what the Broccolini proposal is going to do to the village of Blair. So I think we can go, there's the first slide. So Blair is a village neighborhood on the far west side of the city of Cambridge. It was settled by Europeans beginning in the year 1800. There was initial flurry of activity, building flour mills and sawmills, and then nothing much happened from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century. In 1957, Blair was absorbed into the town of Preston. And in 1974, Preston was effectively absorbed into the city of Cambridge, along with the city of Galt and the village of Hespeler. Since the 1980s, there have been development pressures here in Blair. That led to the completion of the Blair Area Special Study. And that's kind of where the heritage aspect of Blair really starts to come together. Then in 1998, the Heritage Conservation District Plan for Blair was authorized by Cambridge. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see that it was completed in 1999. And that's really the document that sets out what the intent for Blair was going to be. Today, Blair is home to approximately 400 people living in approximately 130 different homes. There's also some small business in Blair, always has been. Blair has always had been home for small businesses. The two large empty land parcels that are enclosed within the village limits were always designated for future industrial land use. but with the caveat that that would be a campus style development, that is smaller buildings spread out, space between the buildings, room for vegetation to grow, room for groundwater to infiltrate. That was always the plan for Blair. In 2012, a piece of that land that we're going to talk about specifically, and I'm going to show you where it is located within the village. That parcel of land was rezoned for the Millgate development. That is a 14-lot small business development, small business subdivision that was pretty much respectful of the original intent for the heritage community. That is dispersed buildings over a 63-acre site with room in between for grass to grow and for groundwater to infiltrate as it does today. And we'll get into the importance of that farther along here. And now if we go to the next slide, we can start to get a little more interest here. So here we see the village of Blair, and I don't actually have control of the cursor. The cursor right now is going around the core of the village. But if you come down to here, actually the easiest place to start is on Dickey Settlement Road, also known as Regional Road 71. Come down a little bit farther, and right about just a little bit farther, right there, that's the southern limit of the village of Blair. Now, if you go east along that tree line that you can see, that's right, just keep going east along there, and you can actually go right off the page and then come back up to Blair Road, along Blair Road to right about there. And now if you were to go straight north, staying on the east side of the river, that too is part of the village of Blair, all the way up to the 401. Now it's a thin sliver of land and it's mostly hillside. So there's not much going to happen there. Then you come back down along the 401 and we're still in the village of Blair. We come all the way back down to the extension of that line we started from, a little bit farther, right there. And now if we come across that tree line, that's the village of Blair. And to set the stage for what we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail here, let's look at Blair Creek. Now, if you start at the Grand River, right just a little bit to your left, a little bit left, right there. Now you can follow the creek. You can see the creek there. Yeah, that's more or less correct. We just passed through one of the original mill ponds, and we just passed under Old Mill Road. So we passed the Shiv Tower, we passed another mill pond. Here we're at the big mill pond now, and we're going to continue following the creek farther up, and we're going to cross Dickey Settlement Road here, and we're going to go off the page, but I'll tell you what happens is that the creek continues up into southeast Kitchener, and there's a big wetland that you can see on the west side of the 401 there. That's pretty much where the headwaters of Blair Creek is. Now, that pretty much lays out the creek. The creek is an important feature here. It's a cold water stream. You can see that it has trees on both sides of it for pretty much its entire length. So it starts off as a cold water stream being fed by shallow groundwater from a sand aquifer there. And then it keeps cool because it's shaded for pretty much its entire length. There's a couple of old mill ponds that provide sun exposure, but by and large, it's a shaded stream, a cold water stream that is actually one of the few urban trout streams. Because of its cold water, because of its protected nature, it has a naturally regenerating brook trout population. And lately, it's been home to a number of decent-sized brown trout as well. So it's a cold water stream. It's a valuable resource. It's fed by the groundwater that recharges from all the green space you can see there, all the agricultural fields. Now, if we come up to Dickey Settlement Road and Old Mill Road, can you find that intersection? Right there. No, back down. A little bit south, right there, that intersection right there. Now, if you go along Old Mill Road out to the 401, right there, and now not quite to the end. Yep, and then come back up along the 401, cross another wetland, and all the way back to the origin again. That's the piece of property that we're going to talk about today. And I think we've got that blowing up a little bit on the next slide rather. So there we have this piece of land, and in this piece of land, we can see here, it must be planted in something. This must be a summertime photograph. Everything's nice and green. But you can see on the top of this piece of land, there's 11.5 acres of wetland. And you can see within the interior, you can see 2 smaller wetland areas. So these wetland areas are important to the overall health of the groundwater, which is important to the overall health of the wetlands, which is important to the overall health of Blair Creek. The 2 wetlands exist in the middle of this property. You can see a clump of trees there in the very middle of the property, right there. Yeah, and you can see another wetland down by the road. No, other side of the road, sorry. Right there, that little piece there. At one time, those 2 wetlands might have been continuous, but the roadway cut them in half there. So these 2 wetlands have an outsized importance because they are essentially dead-end drainage, which means that any water they do catch just sits there until it infiltrates. These 2 wetlands have been deemed disposable under the development plans, and they will be filled in. The original 2015 plan of development would have had a road that starts, if you go back to the intersection of Old Mill and Dickey Settlement, right there, yeah, now come up Old Mill, go out Old Mill a little bit. Right there, there would have been a road come straight across to Fountain Street. Just go straight up, yeah, right there. And then about halfway along that line, there would have been another road going out to the west, curving around and ending up in front of the house you can see on the, that's right, that house right there. So that sort of split up the property into 3 larger pieces. That started off as a 63.5 acre parcel. It did not include the existing houses along Old Mill Road. The development portion did not include the 11.5 acre wetland. And what it was left with after taking out the roads was about 43 acres with a development restriction that was that the hard surface coverage area, that is roofs and asphalt parking lots, could not exceed 25% of the developable land. What that left them with was the opportunity to build buildings and parking lots on roughly 445,000 square feet of that land, or 25% of the 43 some odd acres. That's an important number. Just keep that in mind because we're going to talk about it again when we talk about the Broccolini proposal. So this area is important to the shallow sand aquifer that I mentioned before, feeds into the wetlands, which in turn feed into Blair Creek. They also feed into some private drinking water wells. The shallow sand aquifer was the original source of water for the original pioneers, the people who came out originally and built all the farms that still exist when you go south of here. That water source is still in use for some people on the west side of the creek. And you can see that by covering over that big green space we've been talking about, covering 85% of that with roof and parking lot, that a lot of that recharge is going to be cut off. So that's a significant feature to consider. Now, all of this would have been tolerable under the 2015 proposal because there was still, a balance that pretty much allowed the natural hydrogeologic cycle to remain in place. That is, it rains, water infiltrates, becomes groundwater, moves out to the creek, and becomes surface water again. Now that balance is partly why there was a 25% lot coverage in the first place. So that people in Blair essentially reluctantly agreed to that as being a reasonable compromise, consistent with the heritage values of Blair and consistent with the acknowledgement that, hey, this site's right beside the 401, and it is kind of ripe for some form of industrial development. So the 2015 plan was a reasonable compromise among all of the conflicting objectives of different people about what to do with this land. Then, if we go to the next slide, we're going to see that something very significant happened. And we call it the switch. So the 2015 plan, as I've just described, is a reasonable compromise among all the conflicting values and possible uses for that property. But in January of this year, a company by the name of Broccolini, a developer from Montreal, started buying up all of the property. They bought the Millgate property first, and for the next couple of months, they proceeded to buy all 4 of the adjacent pieces of property. And to make it worse for us, Broccolini convinced the city of Cambridge, the Cambridge City Council, to support its request for a minister's zoning order. A minister's zoning order is effectively the atomic bomb of planning tools. A minister's zoning order allows the planning to go on and the evaluation of the environmental impacts and the transportation impacts and the heritage impacts. It allows all of that to go on behind closed doors with no public participation. It's even more insidious in that the laws that allow an MZO to proceed require other stakeholders, such as conservation authorities. In this case, that would be the Grand River Conservation Authority. It compels those conservation authorities to not withhold approval. So there's a double negative there, but it essentially means that no matter what is submitted to the conservation authority as far as environmental and ecological reports go, they have to accept them. They might be able to comment on them, but they cannot refuse them, and they cannot change the conclusion of the environmental reports submitted by the proponent. So MZO, wasn't quite finished there. Good anticipation though. So historically, the MZOs have been around for a while, but historically, they've been used for matters that were emergencies or for matters that were of broad provincial interest. And they've been used mostly at rural communities that don't have the necessary resources to have their own planning staff, to have their own official plan, to have all of the procedures in place that allow a proper consideration of planning for future land use. Those are the historical uses. This Blair MZO doesn't fit into that. Now, there'll be more discussion about MZOs as we move along here. But for now, let's get back to why we're concerned about this particular MZO. And that starts with the massive scale of this development. We also have concerns about essentially throwing away the planning process, and we have concerns about upholding. Now let's return to the massive development here. 1,080,000 square feet. That's the building. There's another 1.2 million square feet of asphalt paving. So between them there, that's 2.3 million square feet of hard surface. That's 5 times what was allowable under the Millgate plan. That's, I said 85, I think it's actually 83% of the developable land there will be covered by a hard surface. In addition to that, this building is going to be 50 feet high, and it'll be perched on a hill that's already 25 feet higher than Dickey Settlement Road. It will be a massive monolithic structure that looks out over the heritage community of Blair. You know, everyone in Blair has at one time or another had to comply with the heritage requirements, be it when they're getting a building permit, when they're trying to do repairs around the house. The heritage requirements have always been there. People have come to live with them. Some people have moved here because of the heritage requirement. This MZO is essentially throwing all of that away. Local democracy is also thrown away by our own city council's secretive deal with an out-of-town developer to eliminate all public participation in this massive development. Can we go to the next one? So no one provided us with any scale drawings of the site, but we did have some diagrams that showed the building on the property. Those diagrams were used by the Broccolini team in their sales pitch to the city of Cambridge on April the 6th. We asked a number of times to get a scale drawing so we could do our own estimates and so on. Nothing came out of that. So we took their diagrams and basically we just measured the length and the width, and we found that the length was 2.622 times the width. And so we just divided into 1,080,000 square feet to approximate the building dimensions. The building is 1,655 feet long and 631 feet wide. If you plot that building down on downtown Galt, this is roughly what it would look like. It would essentially cover downtown Galt. It's a very big building. I think it's also a very ugly building, but I guess that's a matter of opinion. Now, the parking lot would be that same size plus an additional 20%. So the total package is huge. So our own city of Cambridge has basically thrown out all of the heritage planning that's gone into Blair since 1997. So for the last at least 20 years, coming up on 25 years, this has been a heritage community, and our own city of Cambridge has basically thrown that away. Now, oddly enough, Cambridge recently approved its Cambridge Strategic Plan. They call it Cambridge Connected. The plan includes a public value statement. That public value statement includes the importance of leadership, collaboration, transparency, and engagement. None of these public values have been implemented in the secretive process of supporting this minister's zoning order. There will be an increase to a traffic burden that's already pretty significant. You know, anybody who's driven through here, be it on Blair Road, Fountain Street, or Dickey Settlement Road, will know that during the day, those roads are pretty busy. Fortunately for us here in Blair, that busyness ends in the evening and doesn't start until 6 a.m. the next morning. So we have our evenings and nights relatively quiet here. The new operation in the 1 million square foot warehouse is going to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The new operation is going to include 130, 190 truck trips. Nobody will say if that's in and out or just in. If it was just in, that means there's another 190 trips out. So we're looking at a huge increase in the number of truck trips. Mostly they're going to come off the 401, but let's look at what happens there. They will glide down to the roundabout, but then they will have to accelerate up a hill to what may or may not be a new roundabout at Dickey Settlement Road and Old Mill Road, and then accelerate again up the hill, up the rise on Old Mill Road, because the entrance to the parking lot is at the very end of Old Mill Road, right out by the 401. Coming back out, they'll be going downhill. But for whatever reason, Cambridge and the region of Waterloo have not banned engine brakes. And I think everybody knows what they sound like as a truck is decelerating to make a turn around a roundabout or even a stop to let other traffic through. I think we can go to the next slide. So to reiterate, Blair Creek is a cold water habitat. That's something that's unique in Southern Ontario now. That doesn't occur on every stream. This is a special place. It's a provincially significant wetland, the entire creek on both sides. In fact, the wetland designation runs through people's houses because the designation came after the house. So this is a special area. It needs to be protected. The groundwater is critical to the provincially significant wetland and the creek. It's also important to a couple of local water wells too. The rare charitable reserve is located nearby. If you remember back to the site plan where we traced the boundary of Blair, the next property over is the rare charitable reserve. And of course, the Grand River. So I think, yeah, we're closing in on the end here. So we're concerned about destroying the wetland. We're concerned about ignoring the right of our community to public engagement. We're concerned about subverting the carefully designed planning process that led to the heritage designation here. This building, it may be necessary. We're not disputing that it's not necessary somewhere, but it would be better off in a better location, elsewhere in Cambridge, somewhere else along the 401, maybe with its brethren in Mississauga along the 401. But this is simply the wrong location for a facility of this nature, where it would impose on the natural environment, the already heavy traffic, and the heritage community of Blair. So what we're doing here is we're demanding a voice in this matter, and we would like you to join us and say no to the MZO. And that ends there. And this is Blair Creek, and that little bridge there used to be a railway across that little bridge, and it was part of a complex that was one of the dams for a sawmill on Blair Creek. Sorry for the aside. Go ahead.
Thanks, Alan. So it's a massive development with significant impacts. And one of the questions in the chat box was, let me scroll down to it, was about the Conservation Authority. What gives rise to the Conservation Authority not being allowed to speak openly? And David Donnelly, the lawyer, has answered that in the chat box. It's still an open question about whether they should have. Conservation authorities are free to speak their minds as a corporation, subject to confidentiality. And Jane Newland asked the question, what Indigenous consultation has happened? This is all Haldeman tracked. I'm going to hold that question for a little later. Jane, we'll come back to that. And right now I'm going to ask Julie on the screen. I'm going to ask Alan to turn his video off and ask Julie to come on the screen. And Julie's going to talk about I don't want to steal Julia's thunder, but she's going to talk about what Broccolini didn't say and how they didn't say it, and also raise some questions about Amazon. So over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Hacking. I'm a resident of Blair. I'm third generation Cambridge resident. My grandmother actually had a dairy bar in Preston. I purchased my first home here in the village of Blair in 2018. However, my parents have lived here for the past 14 years, so I've loved visiting the area for over a decade. I will be sharing the village's experiences with Broccolini so far, and some interesting information about the potential tenant, Amazon. Okay, Saturday, May 1st, Broccolini's planner, Chris Pigeon, announced a virtual public meeting through an article in the Record. No notice was given directly to the residents of Blair or surrounding areas. Broccolini Warehouse Distribution Center Public Information Session. This took place May 6th, 6:30 p.m., hosted by Chris Pigeon from GSP Group. Over 170 attendees attended the virtual information session. This was a one-sided presentation, completely controlled and curated by Broccolini and Chris Pigeon. All attendees had no video and were on mute. We had no access to a chat box, and attendees were given access to a question and answer box. However, they were given no visibility to the questions being asked by other attendees, giving the developer complete control over the meeting. They had the ability to curate and phrase the questions how they wanted and avoid all heavy-hitting questions. The questions asked were answered with sunshine and lollipops, giving the attendees no opportunities for follow-up or clarification. Next slide. From the beginning of the meeting, they made it crystal clear they had all signed NDAs and they would not disclose who the tenant was. So this continues to be a mystery, even though the speculation is that it's Amazon. Broccolini has at least 2 other Amazon facilities in progress at this time. Pigeon continually referenced the tight timeline for needing the MZO. This is not a proper use or reason to issue an MZO. From the very beginning of the information session and throughout, the question was asked, will this presentation be shared? Every time this was asked, the answer was yes. To this day, we have not received the presentation. To make things worse, we haven't even received a response, nothing. So starting the relationship off with the community by not following through on a promise is very concerning. How are we supposed to trust anything this developer and planner says? Watching Chris Pigeon stumble through that information session was beyond painful. At one point, he even says Blair was a nice place. He quickly corrects himself, saying, oh, it is a nice place. After comparing the Millgate 2015 versus Broccolini 2021 plan, he quickly brushes it off, saying, it's essentially the same thing. When in fact, as Alan pointed out earlier, it's definitely not the same thing. From a survey of 26 residents, 600 questions were submitted. Only 78 questions were answered. The meeting was an hour and a half, not nearly enough time to answer the amount of questions that were received. At the end of the meeting, they even said something along the lines that they had covered the majority of questions, which was untrue. Needless to say, the information session left the village with even more questions than answers. We now live in fear of a megalithic warehouse casting a shadow over the village life, the environment, and our future. Perhaps Broccolini needs to reconsider its core purpose. On Broccolini's website, they also use the slogan, building great relationships. They even talk about open collaboration. Broccolini should specify this is with corporations and not communities. Next slide.
Julie, just for a second, just before you go on to the part about Amazon, that was very well presented. And it sounds like you were pretty frustrated with your experience with that. And did they, at the beginning, did they advertise it in a way that said, like at the beginning of the meeting, did they say, welcome? Did they raise your expectations, say, we're going to tell you everything you need to know? Did they do anything like that?
Absolutely. They said, we've received your questions and we're going to answer everything, and that they had all the answers.
That wasn't your experience at all, was it?
No, it left us asking more questions, wondering more, wanting to know more. They kind of skimmed over a lot of things, and then they focused on traffic, but not really like answering the question about traffic.
And did they promise any further follow-up? Is there any additional engagement that they promised to you and to the community?
Yeah, they said that they would send the presentation multiple times. The question, we asked this in chat, because we would have recorded the meeting ourselves had we known that they weren't going to be sharing it. I was trying to record it on my phone and other platforms on my desktop, and I couldn't figure out how to work it. And then as soon as they said, yeah, no, we'll share it, like, yes, we will share this presentation, I stopped doing that. And I'm like, okay, perfect. Well, we can digest this later, because it's a lot of information that they shared with us right away that we're trying to digest it all and go, like, kind of just make sense of it all.
It sounds like indigestion was the experience that you had.
Pretty much.
And Julie, you mentioned NDAs. Now, I think NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. And who did they say had to sign an NDA?
Right away, they said everyone on the meeting. I don't remember who all was on the Zoom, but all of the people that GSP had on the Zoom with him, he said right away, everyone has signed NDAs. We will not be disclosing the tenant.
And did he suggest whether or not your councillors have signed an NDA?
I don't remember that point.
Okay, that's something we may come back to later. So Julie, we're going to, in the next part of your presentation, the reason why we're doing this is, and I'm hoping you'll introduce it this way, is I understand that the council is really quite thrilled about the possibility of the Amazon warehouse. They think it's like a very good thing, and maybe you can tell us a bit about what you have heard council saying about it, and then lead us through the next set of concerns.
Mm-hmm. So our ward representative, Donna Reed, she was all for this development. She saw jobs and she was just very excited, and it was a full go for her. And I feel like she didn't question any other angle. She didn't think about any other aspect that it might affect. She didn't consult the residents. We didn't hear from Cambridge City Council at all. We were completely blindsided by this. And we wish they would have done a bit more due diligence and followed the democratic process, as opposed to just seeing this flashy presentation from Broccolini and proceeding.
And so lead us through the next part, Julie. What things are you beginning to learn about Amazon and what their warehouses are like and what they bring or don't bring to their communities?
Mm-hmm. So this information comes from a thought-provoking report by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, which is dedicated to supporting local democracy and ensuring communities are not destroyed by corporations. We will actually be sharing this presentation, so being mindful of the time, I will try not to read all of the content on each slide. However, I encourage you all to later digest all of these 5 points in depth and really think about them. Amazon has a track record of dodging taxes and demanding subsidies it doesn't need. It also has a long history of sidestepping its own tax obligations. For 20 years, the company has worked hard to avoid collecting sales tax, even going so far as to conceal its physical presence in some states. Today, Amazon still does not collect sales tax in 19 states. Amazon warehouses place a heavy burden on services. Amazon is infrastructure intensive. It makes heavy use of roads surrounding its warehouses, causing traffic, safety, and pavement wear impacts. Instead of offsetting these costs, Amazon expects local governments to pick up the tab and often even asks them to extend and upgrade. Amazon won't bring many jobs. In fact, Amazon actually destroys many more jobs than it creates. While local brick and mortar retailers employ 47 people for every 10 million in sales, Amazon employs just 19 people per 10 million in revenue. This means that as Amazon grows and crowds out other businesses, the result is a new decrease in jobs, which is just, with all the small businesses struggling right now, it's very troublesome. Most Amazon warehouse jobs are low-wage temp positions. As many as 2/3 of the people who staff Amazon warehouses are temporary workers hired through staffing agencies. Their wages are low and their hours unpredictable. We've seen so many news articles about this in the past 6 months about the work environment of Amazon and even the COVID breakouts. Like, this is not surprising information. Amazon won't drive business to other area firms. Amazon is headquartered in Seattle. That's where its well-paid executives and tech workers live and where it sources most of the other goods and services it needs to operate. Meanwhile, the cities and counties where Amazon locates warehouses don't get any spin-off benefits from being in its orbit. This contrasts with the development strategy of focusing on growing local business. So I know this is applying to the US Amazon headquarters, but the same trend will happen in Canada as well.
Thanks, Julie. So there really are a lot of questions here. And again, one of the reasons to have a public participation in decision-making is so that the community can talk about whether or not this is something that's important to it. The council has perhaps, has an opinion, and they're entitled to an opinion, but the MZO is a way for them to shelter themselves from the community's input. And we really have to ask ourselves the question, what is the council afraid of? In every community where we do this work, we say, what is the council afraid of? Why aren't they willing to engage the residents? Now, I noticed in the chat box, first of all, Alan, people showing a lot of love for you in your presentation. Thank you. And there's many comments in here about councillors not being responsive, Councillor Reid in particular not being responsive. But there's a question here, Julie, and if you're not able to answer it, we'll pass it on and see if Ed's able to answer it. But the question from Monica and Angelo is, I find it interesting that Pigeon was involved in the 1999 report and now is representing a very different development proposal. Is there a conflict of interest? Now, we're not going to ask you, Julie, if there's a conflict of interest. Maybe we'll save that to ask David Donnelly, the lawyer, later on. But are you familiar with what this is about, what the 1999 report is? And can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's the Heritage Report, and he was one of the consultants on that with Nick Hill.
So that was his opinion in 1999, and now he's
a changed man.
Changed his colors. Thank you, Julie, very much for that presentation. We're now going to introduce Ed Voss. I can see Ed's on the screen here, and Ed's going to lead us through how council has been behaving, what they've done and not done in response to this proposal. Take it away, Ed.
Thanks, Mike. You put up the first slide. Yeah, so good evening. And I've been a resident of Blair for 12 years. My family, we live on John Bricker Road. So my presentation is really going to focus on the Cambridge City Council. So if we can flip to the next slide, I thought it'd be important to put a face to a name of the councillors that basically betrayed the citizens of Cambridge. So let's start with Councillor Reid on the left. You can see her. She's representing our ward. Then if you go to the right, to Scott Hamilton, he was the one that seconded the motion, even though we didn't even know where the village of Blair was. Up above him is Councillor Wolf. And then if we go down to the left, lower left, Councillor Assad, Councillor Emmerich. Then there's Deputy Mayor Mann in the middle. I believe Councillor Devine is not on this picture. And then on the lower right is Councillor Liggett, which is the only one that seems to have some conscience and concern for the citizens of Cambridge. Next slide, please. So Cambridge Council, let's remember, they are elected officials. They represent, or supposed to represent, the interest and well-being of the people, the taxpayers, and the voters. And we've sent over basically thousands and thousands of communications sent to council since they voted to support MZO back on April the 6th. And we've basically faced an almost complete wall of silence in the last 57 days. And that is downright shameful. Next slide, please. So let's walk through some timeline of events. So first, and Alan touched on this in his presentation. So this was a briefing of public values and principles. And this was for a councilors only session. And the 2016 strategic plan provide open, transparent, accountable, innovative leadership. And that was the 2016 plan. And the meeting was to focus on how do they expand and grow that. And it was to build on people, place, prosperity, and include enhanced focus on public value. So that was March 23rd. 2 weeks later, only 2 weeks, Donna Reed puts forward the motion to support the development of a massive warehouse in her own ward, where we all voted for her. No consultation. Motion supported by Councilor Scott Hamilton, which I mentioned. He didn't even know where Blair was. They only had a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation by Chris Pidgeon. We've talked about him. And then they go in camera, which means non-public, for less than an hour. And then they come out and vote unanimously to support Broccolini's request for an MZO. How is this possible? So this is the first opportunity for council to make the right decision, but they don't. Next slide. So April 19th, this is the timeline. This is only a week later, not even a week. They hit the pause button and said, let's rethink. So Councillor Jan Liggett puts forward a motion to reconsider the Blair MZO. It was clear the whole meeting was rehearsed. They had pre-prepared answers for why they object the motion, and they unanimously opposed the motion. You think they might have thought from before till now that say, maybe we should stand back, but no. Continue slides, please. This was their second opportunity for council to make the right decision, but they didn't. Let's go to April 23rd. This is when Steve Clark, Honorable Minister Steve Clark, sends a clear message to the city. And let me paraphrase. This is probably the most key part of my presentation. As with all municipal requests, it is my expectations that the municipality has completed their own due diligence, including consultation with local communities who will be impacted by the requested MZO, or for a request is put in front of him for his consideration. So remember, this is April 23rd, a Friday night. Next slide, please. So now this is Monday, April 26th. Cambridge City staff urge, let me emphasize this, urge Minister Clark to continue with the MZO process. And between the Friday, the 23rd, and the 26th, there is no record of a council meeting to discuss this letter whatsoever. No due diligence, no public consultation. I don't know about you who's listening on this call, but this just makes my blood boil. How can they have the arrogance and the disrespect for the citizens of Cambridge? They're actually disrespected Stephen Clark, because Stephen Clark says, do your job. The councillors are basically saying, we're not doing our job, we should be fired, and by the way, please support an MZO. So finally, May 11th, Cambridge Council starts to do the right thing. And I applaud them for this, but they fall short. In that meeting, unanimously, they basically said, they're not going to support an MZO unless they do all the right things first. Public consultation, heritage impact assessments, consulting all the local governments and associations and environmental groups. And they'll refuse to support any MZO until those policies are brought forward and by the end of 2021. But get this, they say it doesn't apply to the Blair MZO. I don't understand. It's not even approved yet. Why shouldn't the Blair MZO have the same application to every future MZO? Period. Next slide, please. So finally, after thousands and thousands of messages to council, one of the Blair residents, Andrew, reached out to Deputy Mayor Mann and the councillors to ask them to stop the Blair MZO. Finally, we get a call back from the city clerk, Danielle Manton, and says, hey, I think we can set up a meeting with Mayor Mann. Finally, a glimmer of hope, an olive branch. Andrew follows up May 21 with an additional message. Mr. Mayor Mann, we'd like to meet, discuss public consultation. Zero response. June 1st, Andrew reaches out again to invite all councillors and Deputy Mayor Mann to the meeting. Finally, June 2nd, yesterday, no response from any councillors, and Deputy Mayor Mann is too busy and declines the invitation. Pathetic. So what can we do? So Blair Engaged has initiated a formal code of conduct complaint against Cambridge City Council. We've launched a Freedom of Information Act probe into the non-public secretive and backroom deal that's with Broccolini. We're escalating public awareness and participation. We've launched a petition. And next slide. I'm asking everyone to ask Mayor Mann or Deputy Mayor Mann and our councillors why they are not saying no to the Blair MZO. In fact, let me go off script for a moment because that hasn't been so successful. Maybe I should suggest something. Why don't we just drive transport trucks in the backyards of all these councillors, grind gears 7x24, pump pollution in the air 7x24, shake the ground 7x24, shine the high beams of a truck in their bedrooms all night, and see how they like it, because that's going to be the exact experience of the families that live close to this proposed development site. Next slide, please. And I appreciate everyone spending their personal time for these 2 hours listening to our presentation and all the right reasons to stop this lunacy. And it all boils down to one action item, just one. It just takes one. All it takes is for Deputy Mayor Mann on the left to notify Honorable Minister Steve Clark to stop the Blair MZO. That's it. Plain and simple. That's all it takes. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Ed. Now, that Bobby Stewart said in the chat box that this makes her blood boil. And iPad number 4, whoever that might be, says, we're mad as hell and we should not take this bullshit. So I want to invite everybody right now just to kind of give your reaction. We've heard 3 different presentations, all very important to kind of set the stage here. Alan went into very helpful and useful detail, particularly for those who might not live in Blair, to spell out what the community is like and what the impacts look like. Julie shared with us the indigestion she and the rest of the community experienced with Chris Pidgeon's presentation on behalf of the Broccolini Group. And Ed's done a very good job of spelling out how council has behaved and misbehaved. And I think, Ed, you've made it very clear what needs to happen here is that a simple no to the MZO then creates the situation where the citizens can engage with your elected representatives and make decisions together about what's going to happen in your neighborhood. The alternative, of course, being transport trucks driving up and down the streets of the councillors, which I find to be a very attractive idea, Ed. You described it in a very nice, lovely visual way. Now, one of the things about Zoom, folks, that's different than being in a room together, is like it's a bit of an echo. There's a bit of a time delay between me saying something and you responding. And I see that people are responding, and it's some very helpful comments here. So I just want all of you who are part of the Blair Engaged leadership to hear Maureen's comment. We're all indebted to the team working on this. I think that's true. I work in lots of communities. I think you've got an excellent leadership team here. Sharon asks, will it help if we email Minister Clark directly? Yes, it will. And when we come back to the take action page, the take action part of the agenda, we'll talk some more about that. There's a long comment here from someone to Julie. As a viewer of the Broccolini meeting, they were quite thorough with their details as only regards that perimeter of land, and nothing beyond that perimeter of land was of any concern to them. The reality is it's not in a vacuum nor an island of its own. It does immediately affect the neighborhood of at least a 15-kilometer radius in terms of environment, groundwater, nature, population, etc. So there's a very good point that you're making there, and that it's part of the nature of the planning process to focus just on what's in those boundaries of their site and ignore everything outside. Mike is signing up to drive transport trucks with you, Ed. And lots of follow-on comments. Amazing presentation, everybody. Good job, Dad. It's always good to get a shout out from your kid, eh, Ed? And okay, so we'll continue to have your reactions as we go along, but this kind of sets the stage for Mike Sullivan. So Mike Sullivan was part of the leadership group in Get Concerned Stratford. And again, I don't want to steal Mike's thunder, but I think he's going to tell you he's seen this movie before, both in terms of Chris Pigeon, who was the representative up there for Jingi Glass Plant, and for the behavior of the council. So Mike, can we call you onto the stage, turn on your video and your microphone?
Already have. Thanks,
okay,
Mike.
Take it away.
So we were formed initially because we couldn't get information. We're Get Concerned Stratford, which was a name chosen because Get Concerned was in the initials of Guelph-Eramosa Township, which was the first place that Chris Pigeon went with his development proposal for a glass plant. And he lost in Guelph-Eramosa Township in the spring of 2018. And he lost because council there realized it required a lot of water, and the council there realized that a lot of water wasn't something they had a lot of. So in October of 2020, we learned, next slide, please, we being Get Concerned Stratford, was about to vote, the city was about to vote on a cost sharing agreement with Xinyi Canada. Xinyi is the Chinese glass manufacturer, for $6 million, city dollars, to put in infrastructure to support this factory. When we went looking for the history of the project, there was nothing to be found. No minutes, no agendas, no votes, no reference whatsoever anywhere in the city of Stratford's records. There were plenty of in-camera meetings of council, so we guessed that council had decided to pursue this development at an in-camera meeting. We had to guess. Then the blame game started. The province issued an MZO. The province was taking heat for issuing MZOs. The city blamed the province for issuing the MZO. But the province said the city asked for it. And nothing in any meeting we could see, but the province did us a big favor. It released the letters the mayor had written asking for the MZO back as far as November of 2018, 2 years before anybody knew this was happening. So the city had asked for an MZO 2 years before we knew what was going on. And they had hidden everything from the public for those 2 years. The MZO request was apparently with the full consent of the other two governments involved, the County of Perth, the Township of Perth South. But again, next slide, please. No meetings or agendas stating that an MZO would be asked for. The other two councils also acted in secret. Now, the minister, feeling some heat, told a TVO interviewer that the only MZOs he issued, with one or two exceptions, were MZOs asked for by a council in an open public meeting. No such thing happened in Stratford. Next slide, please. In addition, we discovered later that the council and the mayor had been muzzled by signing a non-disclosure agreement. We have yet to see a copy of that document. We've asked for it in an FOI request, but it's still a secret. Next slide, please. We filed a complaint to the city. You got to go to the city saying your meetings are closed illegally. And when we did that, the city then sent that request to the Association of Municipalities LAS Service, Local Administrative Service, who in turn referred it to a lawyer at Aird Bearless. And that lawyer has conducted an investigation. And that investigation has now been received by the city of Stratford. It looks like 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago. And the city of Stratford is sitting on it. They're not releasing the closed meeting investigation, which he wouldn't write a report unless there was something wrong with the way they conducted closed meetings. The investigator, therefore, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a bit about consultants, because apparently you're having to deal with the same guy that we had to deal with and that the folks at Guelph-Aramosa Township had to deal with. Xinyi is a Chinese company registered in the British Virgin Islands whose shareholders are companies registered in the Cayman Islands. We discovered that through the Paradise Papers. We were very careful to steer clear of any insinuations or suggestions that our opposition was based on the national origin of the company, although there were a number of people in Stratford who were very concerned about the two Michaels still being in custody while Canada was playing nice with this company. In a letter to the editor of the local newspapers, both in Stratford and in the region around it, co-signed by Tommy Wong, who was the president of Xinyi Canada, and Chris Pidgeon, believe it or not, he signed a letter accusing us of racism and xenophobia and fabricating facts about the company, which we did nothing of the sort. Pidgeon signed the letter as project manager, Xinyi Canada Glass, and made us wonder if he had quit the GSP group, because he's no longer president of GSP group. He's now project manager, Xinyi Canada Glass. He had acted as their consultant when they attempted to locate in Guelph-Aramosa Township and was apparently acting as a consultant for Xinyi throughout their adventures in Stratford. We also noted that Pidgeon's work was quoted heavily in the justification document the city sent to the province asking for the MZO, because the province didn't give it to him right away. The province actually turned him down and demanded more justification. We wondered if Pidgeon was playing both sides, because you're not allowed to work for be a consultant for a company that's making an application for planning permission in a city at the same time you're working with the city to change the planning system. Like, you can't do both, and he apparently was doing both. We also wondered where the idea for the MZO come from. Pidgeon came up against a reluctant council in Guelph-Aramosa, and we suspect it may have been him who suggested to Xinyi, or the city of Stratford, that a tool existed called an MZO. The newly elected Ford government, remember this was the spring of 2018, had not yet used that tool. But so the first request for one probably came from the mayor of Stratford, and probably put the idea put there by Pidgeon, though we have no way of knowing that for sure. We filed a complaint as a result of Pidgeon now apparently working for Xinyi and apparently having worked both sides against the middle. We filed a complaint with the provincial regulator of planners, the OPPI, which stands for the Ontario Provincial Planners Institute. their bylaws prohibit planners from accepting jobs from the firms they represent and from working for a municipality on the same file they are pursuing with a developer. Pigeon had apparently done both. His reply to my complaint said he finished working for the city on the MZO before the city actually asked, but he got his dates wrong. The mayor's first ask was November 2018, not 2019, as he suggested. So he was still working for the city on the MZO file while the city had already asked for the MZO. We have not yet had a decision. Pigeon behaved exactly the same way as you have described in Blair with us in Stratford. They held, Sheeny held 4 public information sessions at which it was tightly scripted. It was only good stuff, and the questions all came at the end. And they promised us that they would release the proceeds, the meeting, and the video of the meeting. And they did, but they cut off all the questions. So none of the questions, which were somewhat extensive, were ever repeated. Now, we did manage to make a copy for ourselves of what it was that they had put out. So we did have a video copy and were able to quote from it later. What this brings me to is, how do you beat the system? Next slide, please. And next slide, please. And next slide, please. Next slide. Sorry, we actually beat the system. Get Concerned Stratford was up against a almost done deal. The only thing left to finish was the $6 million question of who was going to pay for the infrastructure. Sheeny was going to pay for some of it, but the city was going to be on the hook for $6 million worth of infrastructure. Because that event, that vote had to come to a full council in public, suddenly we knew that what was going on. And that was in October of 2019. Oh, sorry, of 2020. When people discovered this was going on, people got really upset. People who would normally not pay any attention to what city council was doing. And this development was actually on the outskirts of town. So it wasn't something that the people in Stratford had paid any attention to. But Sheeny, we won. We won. We started out thinking, well, the best we can get out of this is a delay. Let's ask council to hit pause. And so the council, because they had to have a public meeting on the $6 million, invited the public to attend that meeting. And we, of Get Concerned Stratford, we didn't know we were Get Concerned Stratford yet. We were just ordinary interested citizens. But we decided to attend that meeting and raise questions about Sheeny's British Virgin Islands and Cayman Islands providence. We raised questions about the $6 million in the middle of a pandemic when businesses are suffering, and Stratford, as a town full of artists during a COVID pandemic, is a town full of starving artists, and that $6 million would have gone a long way. We won because the people got concerned. We held meetings when the city refused to. We held meetings like you're having right now. This Zoom meeting is an immensely powerful tool, because although you may have 200 and some odd people attending this one, you'll have 300 next time, and 400 next time, and 500 next time, because you got to keep having them, because people are interested in this issue and want information, and the city's not giving it to them, and Pigeon's not giving it to them, not straight information anyway. We won because we had a multi-pronged strategy, and we had help from other groups. Lorena McKenna has a group called Wise Communities, which organized and held public square rallies weekly. At that time, and during the pandemic, you were allowed to have 100 people gathering at any one time. And so she, using a sign-up method, limited it to 100 and had 100 people show up in City Hall Square every Monday morning in frigid temperatures. So let me tell you, it was pretty cold. It was middle of winter. But people showed up anyway, 100 of them, and they were angry, and they wanted to know what they could do. We, when COVID rules limited gatherings to 10, You couldn't have an outside gathering of more than 10 people. Lorena brought hundreds of pairs of shoes and put them in the square and said they represented people who were concerned. It was great television. We won partly because we had good media. CTV, CBC, the local papers, the Toronto Star, all played a part. TV likes public faces, so our rallies, and later there were vigils held outside City Hall, became good news visuals, and they really like good news visuals with real people. We won a little bit because we had some money. Thank you to the Wellington Water Watchers for giving us a kickstart while we raised some money. But our first online meeting raised thousands of dollars, which we later spent on polling. We conducted a poll, and polls are things that politicians don't ignore, that suggested that people knew about this and didn't want it. We bought lawn signs. And let me tell you, politicians don't want to see lawn signs during a non-election time that are complaining about what politicians are doing, because people remember that stuff. So we had about 1,000, maybe 1,250 lawn signs sprinkled in a town of 32,000, which means there was one on every few blocks. There would be one, and you couldn't drive anywhere in Stratford without seeing one of our lawn signs that basically said, "Say no to Sheeny," and said it as addressed to City of Stratford councillors. Because by this time it had been clear that they were pushing pause on this thing, but they still weren't decided what they should do. And so we were urging them to say no to Sheeny with our big lawn signs. And I'm sorry I don't have a visual of that, but Mike maybe does. We also sent out a postal walked leaflet to all the residences in Stratford. Now that was an enormous good news thing for us, because now everybody knew what was going on. Everybody knew that this had been done in secret. Everybody knew that there was a $6 million investment on the part of the City of Stratford. And everybody knew that the chances of re-election of the councillors who were going the wrong way were getting slimmer by the day. We won because we got over 600 people to attend Zoom meetings and then call and write all levels of politicians, not just the municipal ones, though they're the ones that made the decision, but the provincial ones. The provincial politician, Miss Kara Halios, lives in Preston. She makes that public in on her website, and is somebody who is probably going to be concerned about this. And we had thousands and thousands of people, or hundreds and hundreds of people, writing letters to the point where the politicians had to stop answering their phones. They just stopped. They told people that had to get a hold of them their cell phone numbers, but their City Hall phones just went to voicemail, all of them. We also won because of blind luck. Rumor has it that were it not for the $6 million council had to spend, they would have completed the deal in camera. So they knew they had to spend money in public. And at that point, many people deputed to their meeting, and council delayed making a final decision. It was just luck because we hadn't been formed yet. And we won, next slide, please, because a concerned group of individuals spent countless hours planning and executing a strategy. When we started, we thought the best we could get was to slow it down. When we finished, we realized not only did we slow it down, we stopped it. Sheeny left town. The minister has revoked the MZO that he issued a year ago, and we are no longer worried about this massive development. You can do the same thing. You're a concerned group of individuals. You are gathering huge numbers of people who care about this town, who care about your problem, and the whole town of Cambridge will come out for you. And we'll love to put out the lawn sign. So don't discount that. Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for the inspiration of your story and the story of all of the people in Stratford. And I encourage those of you who are listening to share your reaction to what Mike has told you. The Mike's putting out has kind of described the playbook of how they stopped it in Stratford. He's described being up against similar kinds of consultant and corporations in Stratford as you are in Cambridge. And in a moment, I'm going to go call David Donnelly to the screen. David's a lawyer at Donnelly Law. He'll introduce himself and his firm. He's been retained by your leadership group. He was retained by Get Concerned Stratford and worked very closely with them. And I think that David's going to add to Mike's story. And David, during your presentation, wherever you think the right place is, there's a couple of questions for you to address. One is, has there been consultation with First Nations people, as this is in the Haldeman Tract? And also there was a question about, is there any kind of conflict of interest about Chris Pidgeon representing the city in 1999 on the heritage proposal and then representing Broccolini now? And, you know, we always like to ask lawyers conflict of interest questions, so we're going to let you speak to that too. So take it away, David.
Thanks very much, Mike. And again, thanks to Blair Engaged for the opportunity to work on your behalf. It's been a short while, but it's been very exciting so far. The point of my presentation tonight is to bring you up to date a little bit on what we've done from a legal perspective. I'm going to speak a little bit about our experience in places elsewhere dealing with MZOs. And then finally, I'm just going to touch on what some next steps might look like, at least in terms of some of the legal avenues that are available to the citizens of Blair Engaged. So if we could go to the next slide. So our firm was founded in 2008 to provide legal services to citizens groups like Blair Engaged. Our primary purpose is to protect the environment. We're not a commercial law firm. We charge reduced rates. What we get back for that is what we call the green dividend. It's very important to us that we only engage in projects that are sustainable or that protect the environment. In 2001, for a decade's worth of pro bono assistance to the Huron-Wendat Nation, I was awarded the Prix Mérité de la Nation for our efforts to try and reestablish the Huron-Wendat patrimony, their protection of their cultural heritage resources in Ontario. That forms part of our experience. Thank you. In 2018, our firm was retained by the Get Concerned group in Guelph-Aramosa. That council had initially recruited Gigny to its town, and then through a series of events, which I'll describe briefly later, Guelph-Aramosa, Get Concerned Aramosa were successful in driving Gigny out of town. As Mike has already suggested, we were also retained in Stratford for Get Stratford, dealing with the same Gigny plant, the same planter, Mr. Pidgeon. And so we do have some experience dealing with both the MZOs and large warehouse or industrial facilities coming to town. We go to the next slide. So first, what is an MZO? As you've heard very briefly, it's a discretionary ministerial authority under the Planning Act. It creates a new zoning or freezes zoning without the approval of municipal council. There is no advance notice, unlike virtually every other instrument issued under the Planning Act. And there's no right of appeal, so it also makes it very unusual in the suite of planning rights that citizens of Ontario normally enjoy. It's extremely rare in Ontario to have issued MZOs. And in fact, most MZOs that were issued previously, or at least some, were used to protect environmental resources on the Oak Ridges Moraine or in the Greenbelt. It's only been since the Ford government has been elected that MZOs are now routinely used to approve developers' projects, many of whom are donors, very substantial donors to the Ford government. They're hugely controversial, and primarily for the reasons I've already stated, which is that they're fundamentally undemocratic, and they are perceived widely as being a gift to developers. The primary question that you have to ask when your council adopts an MZO is, why Mr. Broccolini and why Amazon? What about the little guy or the little woman who simply wants a new back deck, or they want a patio for their sandwich shop so they can hire a kid to work after school? Why don't those people get to circumvent the Planning Act the Committee of Adjustment. Why do they have to seek a minor variance when all you have to do is be a friend of the government? So MZOs ask the very profound question of what rights do some people have and what rights do developers have? If we get up to the next slide. So you've heard quite a bit about Get Concerned in Stratford and the Ginny float glass plant, which has now been canceled, as you've heard. Mike is very right that one of the primary ingredients there was simply the outrage at the mayor and council for doing all this behind their back. It was covered extensively by the Toronto Star, an excellent reporter named Noor Javid. I do recommend that you read that because it was really a roadmap for you and was covered extensively in the Toronto Star, and I think has given real voice to people. The MZOs seem to have slowed since the Stratford experience. Perhaps the government has taken notice of a citizen engagement, and I think now, Cambridge, you are in the front rank of citizens standing against these MZOs. If we get up the next slide, please. There's a second famous example of MZOs being defeated, and that was the case of the entertainment center in Pickering. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer insofar as what was proposed was a very large entertainment center that would be a part of the casino that was proposed in Pickering, but that on the west side of the project, there was to be a large warehouse distribution center that was an Amazon project, and an MZO was issued after the Pickering Council had voted for it. Turning around and rejecting the MZO, the Toronto Star again covered the episode, and they said Pickering Council voted unanimously Monday night to ask the province to revoke a minister's zoning order that fast-tracked development on environmentally sensitive wetland in Durham that has been the site of controversy since last November. The developer also signed a legally binding agreement with Environmental Defence, saying it would refrain from any activity in the lands until the advocacy group had a chance to challenge the legality of the MZOs, expected sometime later this year. In other words, the Pickering Town Council heard residents, and the environmental group Environmental Defence sued the province regarding the MZO for reasons that I'll delve into later. But there is a second example where a municipal council that was extremely enthusiastic about the Amazon distribution center coming to their town, turning around and asking the province to revoke the MZO. In other words, you can fight back and win. If we go to the next slide, please. Now, the key questions are, what can you do? And first, you should be demanding that Minister Clark stick to his word. He said that MZOs cannot be issued until a developer's request has been fully debated and voted on in public, which is not the case here in Cambridge. Second, you must require your mayor to convene a public meeting and to make all correspondence with Broccolini available, and that to rescind the request for an MZO until the public has had a chance to debate this matter fairly, and that the vote be taken in public. If we could have the next slide, please. Now, this was Minister Clark's words in an interview with TVO, which was conducted 1 year ago. The question was, under part of Bill 197, this is to further extend the powers of the minister to issue MZOs, is extending and elaborating the minister's powers regarding MZOs. What's the plan there? This was Minister Clark's response. We've worked very collaboratively with municipalities. With every MZO I've done, I put the emphasis not on me, the minister, but on councils. Aside from the Toronto Sunnybrook Hospital, which started with Councillor Jane Robinson, all the other projects were discussed in an open meeting in a council and presented as a resolution to the ministry. So clearly your council, Cambridge, has failed the minister's own test with respect to transparency, and that's significant when we talk about the legal issues in a moment. If we could go to the next slide. Now, the minister himself has told your council to do its due diligence. This was covered in the record. In a letter addressed to Mayor Catherine McGarry, Clark said he's been made aware of public concern about a proposal to build a massive warehouse. In other words, you've been effective. You have been heard. The minister went on to say, as with all municipalities, it is my expectation that the municipality has completed their own due diligence, including consultation with local communities who will be impacted by the requested MZO before a request is sent for my consideration. Now, note the use of the word there, due diligence. That's a legal term. There are requirements that are well defined in case law that suggest that due diligence attaches with it legal consequences if the due diligence is not done. The word due diligence is extremely important in this context. Now, the fact that Mayor McGarry is the acting mayor or is dealing with the inactive mayor is not the essential element. It's the fact that the minister himself has said that council is responsible for doing due diligence. If we could have the next slide, please. Now, there's a new development, very recent, that concerns First Nations. And that is the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council has announced a moratorium on new development in the Haldimand Tract. This is a very important development with respect to this case. The council has said on April of this year that no development can proceed without consent of the Haudenosaunee. Consent, of course, cannot occur until there has been constitutionally respected dialogue or consultation with First Nations. Someone has asked, has that consultation occurred? Well, if it has not been done in public. And if it has, it certainly didn't include the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Now, the Haldimand Tract is a very famous piece of land that was granted in terms of settling certain treaty obligations and obligations to First Nations. But if we look at Blair and where it's situated in the Haldimand Tract, if we can go to the next slide, there you are. The gray hatching or the gray screen is the Haldimand Tract, which runs north from Lake Erie. There's Blair in the middle of the Haldimand Tract. So if there's any wonder about the positions of the Haudenosaunee Traditional Council, they are saying no development in Blair. Now, given the recent developments with the residential school program, I have to ask your mayor and council, how extensive was their consultation with First Nations? Where's the record of the consultation? What shocked me is Mr. Pigeon has nothing in his reports that speak to a proper constitutionally valid consultation with First Nations. Now, whatever has happened in the last years, we have to be mindful of the fact that all of us are responsible for our elected governments and their treatment of First Nations. And what we've seen to date, at least on the record, is that the rights and interests of First Nations have not been respected. And this is something that I find shocking would be associated with a company like Amazon, who touts their environmental responsibility, who touts their human rights records. This, for me, is almost impossible for me to believe or to countenance in modern day Canada, where we stole children from their parents, we put them in what were prisons, and now we're seeing the result of some of that treatment of First Nations. This, to me, is unbelievable and shocking that Amazon would be part and parcel of something like this. I simply won't believe it, but Amazon should step up to the plate and they should make their intentions transparent before they locate in this community or any other. We can have the next slide, please. Now, you are led by an extremely well-organized and competent leadership team. In the short time since your council made this horrible decision, there has been a request on the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection Act for all correspondence consisting of minutes of meetings, agendas, emails, letters, notes, phone records between Broccolini, Mayor Catherine Regreda, the Honorable Steve Garza, and any other official or representative of your municipal council. Second, a complaint has been filed with respect to the closed meeting. This deal was done in secret. This request was made without the knowledge of residents. This secret in Canada meeting was meant to debate the Broccolini MZO request. And so a request a complaint has been made with respect to circumventing Section 239 of the Municipal Act, which only allows for these secret closed meetings in a case where litigation is being discussed or some other matter involving human resources, labor matters, a sale or acquisition of property, which is simply not the case here. Finally, there's been a complaint under the Cambridge Code of Conduct. Council rushed this request through a secret meeting with little or no debate and no engagement of the public. It's in the Cambridge Code of Conduct that states members shall conduct council business and their duties in an open and transparent manner so the public and staff can understand the process. Do any of you feel that this MZO request was issued in a transparent manner and that staff and council produced a process that you can understand? It's completely unintelligible. It's completely undemocratic. That's a valid complaint. If we could have the next slide, please. There's been a letter to your council was issued by our office that said that council should immediately rescind its MZO request for failing to do its due diligence as directed by Mr. Clark. We told the minister that residents had every expectation that a small scale development would be built on the site based on the zoning and the agreement with the OMB between residents, Cambridge, and endorsed by the OMB. That agreement respected the environment, provincially significant wetlands in the Blair's Creek. What is being proposed is a complete betrayal of the OP's goals. The fact they need an MZO proves that what is being requested here is not consistent with the current zoning. Anyone else in the province of Ontario, except for the special friends of government, this government, must comply with the zoning, or they must make a Planning Act application, in which case they are subject to an appeal. This certainly would have been appealed if Amazon had made its intentions known and worked this through a proper planning process. If we could have the next slide, please. There's been a letter to the minister, which again outlined all of the failings of your council with respect to the request and makes it abundantly clear that both the Code of Conduct and the Municipal Act were likely violated when this council went into camera to make this MZO request. The minister is fully informed of the outrage of the people of Cambridge and Blair with respect to how this matter has been conducted. There's been no due diligence here. There's been nothing but secrecy and a lack of transparency. We could have the next slide. Now, remedies in court. Now, I have to say that the first rule of the Fight Club is you don't talk about the Fight Club. And so it would be unwise for me tonight to address the matter of what legal actions are being prepared if this MZO gets issued. But I can say that in the Pickering example, environmental defense went to court challenging the government, and that was part and parcel of the government's rationale, I believe, for not pursuing the the development. Now, in my respectful opinion, based partly on the way this MZO was requested, and based partly on the fact that this is a breach of an existing approval, which was the zoning that was agreed to, in my respectful opinion, this MZO, if issued, would not be consistent with the Planning Act, would not be consistent with the provincial policy statement, would not be consistent with the Canadian Constitution, and would not conform with the Cambridge official plan. And for all those reasons, I have been given instructions with respect to legal action. Now, we'll leave it at that, but if anyone thinks that the residents of Blair aren't prepared to fight for their environment, for future generations, and for the rule of law, they're fooling themselves. Now, on the matter of a thorough review of the consistency with the official plan and with the Planning Act, there's some exciting news that's going to be announced by your leadership tomorrow. A very senior planner in the province of Ontario has been retained who specializes in two things: engagement with First Nations, and also has a familiarity with public engagement and consistency with proper planning practices and best practices with respect to consulting residents. This is a significant development, and I think that both the minister and Amazon should take careful note of what's going to transpire tomorrow when this announcement is made. Now, finally, you are in great hands here with Alan and John and Mary and the team of your neighbors. Mike Balkwell and the Wellington Water Watchers have been involved in this fight before, and they have won. Our firm has represented a number of citizens groups who have both stopped MZOs in the past and prevented similar types of facilities from being developed in sensitive areas like the PSW and so on. And so in conclusion, what I would say to you is the only thing that is standing between you and stopping this MZO is your voice, your power, and your decency. I bet that you are all good neighbors in Blair. I bet that you all respect the law. And I bet that you all believe in democracy. It's your voice now that has to ask your mayor and council, do they share your values? Because if this MZO request isn't rescinded, then you can conclude that you have been betrayed, they don't share your values, and your mayor and council are not good neighbors. And that is something that a court will take very specific notice of. Thank you. Those are all my submissions.
Thank you, David. Now, folks, you've heard a lot from David. So again, I encourage you to respond in the chat. And, there's a delay between what you hear and typing into the chat box. So please do that. And David, while we're waiting for reactions and comments, there was a question which was, is there grounds for a class action suit here against council?
So that is a very interesting question. I would say at this point it's premature because we haven't heard back from Amazon. But certainly if Amazon comes to your neighborhood and it builds this facility and its trucks are rumbling through your neighborhood and your air quality is compromised, then I would say, yes, that is something that residents should seriously look at in terms of a remedy.
Okay, so we're getting some comments in the chat box. Excellent presentation, David, and the presenters tonight. Let's fight this. So I'm going to call Mary McGrath back to the stage with me, and we're going to talk about fighting this. And, you know, Cam asked a question earlier about how do you fight something like this? And so Mike Sullivan's been giving us advice, David's been giving us advice, and you know, as a representative of the Water Watchers who've been doing this, who've been engaged in other communities before, I'm giving your leadership group some advice too. And in a moment, Mary's going to tell us, we're going to talk about the things that are planned. But one of the things that I want to just kind of summarize first is you do need to move on several fronts. And as Mike Sullivan said to us, making your outrage at this public and visible is very important. And it's particularly important during the public health measures that we're following with regards to the pandemic, because in earlier times, you would be filling the town hall council chambers and they would be shaking in their boots. And they don't shake in their boots as much when they're distanced from us. And so because of Zoom, et cetera, because of those public health measures, we have to really make an extraordinary effort to be visible. The communities have to make an extraordinary effort to be visible in their opposition. Mike Sullivan described how they did that in Stratford. And we've been talking with your leadership group. And Mary, I think you've got some things to tell us. I think there's something happening this weekend you want to both tell people about and invite them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that we've got a slide to this effect so that people can see and follow along. So I just wanted to follow up on your point, Mike, that one of the reasons that we feel betrayed, but also this is very, very difficult for all of us because we are in a pandemic. Everybody is overwhelmed just with their regular life. And then on top of that, we have to fight this. And it's not easy to take action when we're not allowed to gather in public spaces together. We can't have meetings together. Although I will say that the community of Blair, with support from others in Stratford and Guelph and across Ontario, feels like we're more cohesive and, you know, and more sort of, that you talked about, or David talked about being a good neighbor. We feel like we have that that sense of community now more than ever. And so I think that's also something that is really important for us, is that we don't feel like we've lost our community vibe. In fact, we've grown it, and we feel stronger than ever. And so, but on the other hand, there are a lot of considerations to take into account when we're trying to organize actions and to show to Cambridge City Council how much we care about this, and to raise our voice. As David mentioned, our voice is one of the most powerful things that we have, and it's hard to do that in a pandemic, but we're not going to stop. And so we have, as Mike Sullivan mentioned, we have created lawn signs. You may or may not have seen them across Cambridge, but I know I have seen them down on sort of Highway 24 South, heading down into Brantford, all the way up into the 401 area. And so you can request a lawn sign from us, having that on your lawn. And as Mike Sullivan said, just for people in Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge to be able to see those lawn signs and to ask to themselves what's an MZO, what's going on, is really important. So if you can, please request a lawn sign, and you can do that at saveblair.com, our website. The second thing you can do is sign up for our email list so that we can keep you up to date on what's happening. There are things happening literally every single day, and we want to be able to keep people informed. And so you can email villageofblair@gmail.com to join the mailing list, and we'll have lots of opportunities for volunteers. And again, we'll just be able to keep you up to date on what's happening, any new developments, developments, advance notice of anything, emails that we need you to write, and Water Watchers have been so supportive with that. And so so please sign up for the email list. We are planning to have our days of action on Tuesdays going forward, because that's the day that Cambridge City Council meets, and it's just an easy day to remember. And so we're going to give them lots to think about at every single council meeting as we organize actions during the day. Saturday, June 5th, we are going to be at the Cambridge Market. Again, because of COVID and restrictions, we're not going to be able to gather in large groups, but we are going to do it safely. We are going to be handing out flyers. We will have lawn signs available. So please, if you're planning to go to the farmers market in Galt, please stop by the Cambridge Market. We'll be out safely and within provincial guidelines and local guidelines, and with full approval of the of everyone who makes decisions in that regard. We will be there. So you can meet us and grab a yard sign and hopefully some flyers. And then the next thing is going to be a protest, again with safety guidelines and consideration, at the roundabout at Fountain Street and Dickey Settlement Road. So this is one of the roundabouts that's planned to be expanded. It's right between Conestoga College and the proposed development site and homes, and they're planning on making it a lot bigger. And as has been mentioned, it's a huge traffic concern already. I feel so concerned just now for all those students trying to cross that roundabout as they head to Conestoga College. So we are going to be there. We'll be there safely, and we'll be there with our signs, and we would ask you to drive by and honk and show your support for that. So that'll be again on a Tuesday, June 8th. The next thing is we have a website, and we have a petition on change.org that has over 7,500 signatures. And if you haven't already, please visit our website and sign up for our change.org petition so that we can count your support on that. And the link is on the saveblair.com website. And then finally, we have been busy doing a lot of work, and as Mike Balcol has mentioned, the developer has invested probably somewhere around $50 million, and we are trying to raise our voice, and that requires some funding and support. And we don't have $50 million, but we do require some support in order to be able to achieve all the things that we want. We want to win this, and we know we can. And so we are going to be asking everyone who is able, if you can, please make a donation. And that would go so far. It doesn't matter how much. It could be $5, it could be $500, it could be $5,000, but any donation will go a long way to helping us achieve some of the things like printing the flyers and printing the lawn signs, and working with experts who are going to help us win this battle. So that's a list. If you have any questions about any of those activities, please let me know. Please write it in the chat. I will respond. Mike and I are going to also check back in the questions. And I'm going to thank you in advance for taking all those actions. And we will reiterate these as we share this presentation with you and follow up with all of you by email.
So thanks, Mary. And in just a moment, we're actually going to do some fundraising. But somebody has asked, what time should they be at the farmers market? What time are you going to be there?
Well, the farmers market opens very, very early, and we're still in the process of creating our own schedule. But I would say if you're going to be there at 8 o'clock, likely we'll be there. So probably we were going to have a booth, but we can't do that. So so I don't think we're going to start as early as we had planned, but I would say from 8 o'clock till noon, we will be there at the farmers market.
And what time are you going to do your protest at the roundabout? If people want to come by and honk, what time should they come by?
Yeah. So the protest we're planning for the evening hour, the evening rush hour, and we'll be out there between 4 and 6 p.m. on Tuesday, June 8th.
Terrific. So as Mary said, you can make a charitable donation, but I'm going to make it be a little stronger and talk about doing some donations now. And I just want to do a little bit of math out loud with you folks. As people have said, Broccolini's got $50 million into this. Now, when I do my mental math, 10% of 50 million is 5 million. And then when I do my next mental math, 1% is $500,000. And we're going to ask you, we've got a budget that we've worked out that's 1/10 of that. So I think that's 1/10 of a percent, which is $50,000. And so the group needs a war chest of $50,000 to have the impact that they need to have, first to stop the MZO. And I want to come back to something that somebody said earlier in the chat box, which is, should we be focusing on Steve Clark and Doug Ford in the PC cabinet? And yes, absolutely you should, because job one is to stop the MZO. If Stephen Clark receives enough pressure that he doesn't give the city an MZO, you then have the opportunity to fight them on the warehouse. If they give him the MZO, it's a much, much more difficult fight. So when Ed was saying, call Mike Mann and tell him to say no to the MZO, that's very good advice. And in addition to that, we want to send messages directly to Steve Clark. But what we want Steve Clark and Doug Ford to see, we want them visibly to see in the media and have reported to them by conservative supporters in your community that you're, as somebody said earlier in the chat box, mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. Now, your leadership, in order to be able to plan with confidence and to do the kinds of activities that, for example, Mike Sullivan was describing, they need a budget of $50,000. Now, here's the good news. They've already raised $25,000. You in the community have already given $25,000. That's terrific. What I want to find out in the next 10 minutes is how much of the rest of the gap between $25,000 and $50,000 you will pledge. And so I'm going to ask you to make pledges in the chat box. And I'm going to start off by asking a certain amount. So don't rush in and say $100 yet, because I'm going to start somewhere else. As Mary said, you could give $5, you could give $500, or you could give $5,000. And in fact, I want to ask right now if somebody will pledge $5,000. And you can write in the chat box your name and say you'll pledge $5,000. Now, you've got the next few months to actually make that contribution if you wish. And you can make your pledges online. It's been put in the chat box, and you will receive a tax receipt for your donation. And folks, if we were in a room together, I'd be able to see you. It'd be like an auction. You could put your hand up right away. I'd be able to see, we'd be able to respond, but there's a little bit of a time lag here. So I've got to be patient with you, and you have to be patient with me. So I'm asking, is there somebody out there who now will make a pledge of $5,000 to help save Blair Village, to help protect local democracy, to help stop an MZO, to help bring the kind of political culture to your community that you deserve? Is there somebody who'll pledge $5,000? I wish I could see all your faces. We'll double our original donation from $2,500 to $5,000. Thank you, Monica and Angelo. That's terrific. That's a terrific start. Okay, is there somebody who wants to, remember that all tax donations are tax deductible. Is there somebody who wants to join Monica and Angelo? So we're $2,500, that's 10% towards our goal of $25,000 more. Is there anybody who wants to join? I'm going to say it this way. Is there anybody who would like to join Monica and Angelo and make a pledge of $2,500? Well, is there somebody else who make a $2,500 donation? Now that, for example, is something you could pay in monthly installments of $500. And it's going to help the community, it's going to help your leadership know that they can buy lawn signs, that they can print leaflets. They might want to conduct a public opinion poll. As Mike said, when we did the public opinion poll in Stratford and released the results that showed that 65% of the community did not want that development. And in fact, we're planning in the next municipal election to base their vote on the result of how councillors voted on the issue. It really shook things up. Money in the hands of your leadership group that they can translate into action will shake things up. Is there anybody who will provide a $2,500 pledge? Denise and Steve Takis will donate $2,500. That's terrific. Thank you, Denise and Steve. So we're at $5,000 total. Is there anybody else who wants to join the group with Denise and Steve, or with Monica and Angelo, and make a $2,500 donation. Again, if we were in the room together, I could smile at you. I could walk closer towards you. You could smile back at me. We could wave at each other. We'd feel the excitement in the room. Thanks so much, Denise and Steve. How about $2,000? Is there somebody who'll make a $2,000 pledge? This would be very important to the group's ability to plan with confidence. There's lots of reasons to be concerned about the impact of this warehouse on the water in the Blair area. I think it's also important for people who may not live in the Blair neighborhood to think about what would happen if what could happen in your neighborhood or in your community if the council decided they wanted to land something there that would have a huge impact on you and would use an MZO to do that. So this fight is your fight, not just that of the people who live in Blair. It really is about the future of your community. Thank you, Bobby, for the $50 donation. Is there anybody who will pledge $2,000? Okay, how about $1,500? The people in the audience who will pledge $1,500. That would work out to be about, help me with my math here, $300 a month over 5 months. That's how math works, right? Yes, 3 times 5 is 15, $1,500. Is there anybody who'll make a pledge of $1,500? Okay, how about $1,000? Who will make a pledge of $1,000? My wife Carol and I are in for, that's like a very big number, Cam Crawford. It says $41,000. Is that the number you meant to put in? Because if it is, it's a very big number. So Cam, just double check the number you've got. $1,000. That's terrific, Cam. Thank you. And $1,000 from Melissa and Mike Malik. Thank you. Is anybody else who give $1,000? It's really important that the group can plan with confidence because it will give them the ability to amplify the voices and amplify the outrage. We're at $7,000 now. CJ says, I wish to thank you to all the presenters for standing up, keeping us informed and helping us be heard. I'm pleased to see there's so many concerned parties here leading and taking action. Thank you, Mary, Alan, Blair, Ed, Julie, and she pledges $1,000. She or he, sorry, I don't know who CJ is. Thank you, CJ. And another $1,000 to the previous donation of Rob and Vanessa. Thank you very much. So that puts us at $9,000. We're a little past the 30% mark on our way to our goal. So Tony will add $500 to previous donation. That's terrific. That brings us to $9,500. Is there anybody else who wants to donate? Let's try $750. How's that for a nice middle number? Is there somebody who will make a pledge of $750? You can make your pledge now. You can let us know when you're able to make the payment later. If you're able to make the payment now, you can go to the link that's in the chat box. It's through a group called the Small Change Fund. You'll see a very specific project there, and you'll be issued your tax receipt immediately. There's the link in the chat box. Is there anybody who pledged $750? Mary McGrath adds $750 to her previous one. Thank you, Mary. So we're over $10,000. How about $500? Who will make a pledge of $500 towards the campaign to stop the MZO? I'm sure that if I was in the room right now, there would be a flurry of hands go up. Jane Newland says she's just made a small donation. Thank you, Jane. And we'll go to our Fountain Street community and ask everyone to match and contribute. That's terrific, Jane. I don't know who, I'm from out of town, literally, so I don't know who the Fountain Street community is, but if you need any support with that, Jane, in terms of how to actually make that ask or share that information, let us know. Is there anybody else who'll make a $500 donation? Does this feel like a telethon? Gino and Penny have added 500 to their previous donation. Thank you. You just imagine behind me, there are people receiving your telephone calls. We could bring a singer out to entertain you. Is anybody else who'd like to make a $500 pledge? Okay, how about $250? Who will make a pledge of $250? Matthew's adding 1,000 to his donation. Thank you, Matthew. So we're at 11,700. We're almost halfway to our goal, to our next goal. So if somebody will donate $700 right now, that'll take us to 50% of our goal. That'll take us 50% of the way to $25,000. Is there somebody? Kathy Glazer for $1,000. Thank you, Kathy. So now we're at 12,700. This is terrific. And Bobby, another $200. Thank you. So that puts us at $13,000. How about now that people pledge any amount that you want to pledge? So if you'd like to pledge $1,000, that's terrific. If you'd like to pledge 100, if you'd like to pledge 10, or as Mary said earlier, 5 or 500 or 5,000. We'd like to, in the next few minutes, Danny Lindemood pledges $400. Thank you, Danny. Are there other donations that we can see in the pledge? Because this will be very motivational. Your leadership is working very hard. You see tonight how committed they are. You see how passionate they are. You see how hard they're working and how hard they're going to work. I can see in the chat box how much you appreciate them. We want you to be involved. There are many ways for you to get involved in addition to donating money, and we're going to provide those opportunities for you to be engaged. And the group needs to have a budget that they know what they can work with. So we're seeing now another $100, another $500, another 100 is 6, another 5 is 11, another 100 is 12. I think that gets us to 14,600. So how about this? When we get $400 more in donations, then we'll call it a night. So we're at 14,600. I think that Peter's just donated 100. So $300 more will bring us to $15,000. I'm just going to try and keep this open that long, and then we're going to call Mary to close the meeting. Going once, going twice. Mary, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call you back to the stage for you to welcome and thank people, and we're going to watch the chat box and see if an additional $300 in donations comes in, which would mean a total of $15,000 tonight, which is terrific, which we can add to the $25,000 you have already, which gives you a $40,000 budget that you can plan with. And over the course of the coming months, we can continue to do the work to raise another $10,000. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Mary, and there you go.
Yeah, I'm just having some internet issues here. So can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. I'm just texting my kids to get off the internet here. So thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, this is great. I am so impressed and just really super stoked about everybody's made donations, and just so grateful to all of you for not only showing up tonight and spending a beautiful Thursday evening online with us in our community meeting on Zoom, but also then contributing financially to support the cause is just so appreciated. So I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight, and to my colleagues and on the leadership team, Alan and Julie and Ed, and Tim, who's here tonight too, and to Mike Sullivan for coming and talking to us about the Stratford's experience, to David Donnelly for all of his expertise and legal insights, and to you, Mike Bulkwell, and the team at Water Watchers, Danny and Megan and Hareen, and also to Small Change Fund for facilitating so much of this and being such a great partner in this project. And I noticed that there were some local media in attendance tonight, and I just want to thank them for coming out and also for their interest in our story, because that has just been so, so appreciated. I know that there are community members here tonight and that there are community members from outside of Blair. Many of you have fought for your democratic process in your community and have faced similar challenges with MZOs. And so we're just so grateful to all of you. And I just wanted to kind of close with the thought that, a reminder that MZOs are being misused in Blair, but also all across Ontario. And so, this is a fight for all of us in Ontario, because we just don't know whose neighborhood is going to be next. It could be your neighborhood next if you're not in Blair. And so this is an issue that I think that should concern all of Ontario. And I'm just grateful that all of you have shown up, and that there is really just, it's kind of two sides of one simple action that needs to happen here. And Alan did a great job, and other speakers, of outlining that Deputy Mayor Mann should rescind the MZO request on behalf of council and do the proper due diligence to consult with the community, and that Minister Clark should not approve the MZO he should not approve the MZO, so that the council can do that proper due diligence with the community. So it's a simple action, and we intend to get there. And we will follow up with all of you with the recording of the session tonight, and with in line with our calls to action, with emails to give you guys all details on how you can get more involved, and ways to take action to support Blair and the residents to protect our community from this MZO and all of Ontario from MZOs in the future. So thank you again. Thanks for your time. And I hope that all of you have an amazing, wonderful evening. And we look forward to seeing you on Saturday at the market and on Tuesday at the roundabout.